They laughed before they knew his name, and by the time they learned it, the sound of that laughter would feel heavier than any badge they had ever worn. At 11:47 on a gray Tuesday morning in Riverton, Ohio, the police department cafeteria was alive with the small noises of routine. Plastic trays sliding across stainless steel rails, coffee dripping into stained glass pots, radios crackling softly from the belts of officers who had learned to eat quickly and speak even faster. The room smelled like reheated chili, burnt toast, and old caffeine, the kind of smell that clung to government buildings no matter how often someone mopped the floor. Men and women in uniform sat in clusters beneath fluorescent lights, talking about traffic stops, weekend football, overtime shifts, and the weather moving in from the west. Then the door opened, and a black man stepped inside wearing a plain navy jacket, a light blue button-down shirt, dark slacks, and shoes polished just enough to say he respected himself without needing anyone else to notice. He carried no visible badge, no nameplate, no rank on his collar, just a quiet posture, a steady gaze, and the kind of calm that made him look neither lost nor eager to impress. His name was Marcus Ellison, though no one in that cafeteria knew it yet. To most of them, he was just a stranger walking into a room where everyone had already decided who belonged before he ever reached the coffee machine. Officer Brent Callahan saw him first. Brent was leaning back in his chair with one arm stretched over the seat beside him, laughing at something another officer had said, when his eyes landed on Marcus. The laughter faded into a smirk. He looked Marcus up and down, slow enough for others to notice, loud enough without speaking to pull the room's attention toward the door. Then he tilted his chin and said, "Well, look at that. New diversity hire." A few officers chuckled. Not everyone. Just enough. Enough for the sound to travel. Enough for the room to change. Marcus stopped with his hand resting lightly on the edge of a tray. He did not raise his voice. He did not tense his shoulders. He simply turned his head toward Brent and held his gaze for one full second longer than comfort allowed. "Is that supposed to be funny?" he asked. The question was calm, but it cut through the cafeteria harder than anger would have. Brent's smirk widened because men like Brent often confused quiet with weakness. "Relax, rookie," he said, lifting both hands as if he were the reasonable one. "Just making sure you can handle cafeteria humor before somebody puts you on the street." More laughter followed, thinner this time, nervous around the edges. Marcus picked up his tray, placed a cup of black coffee beside a wrapped sandwich, and walked toward an empty table near the window. Every step was measured. Every eye followed him. And somewhere near the soda machine, a young officer named Daniel Price lowered his gaze, already knowing something wrong had happened, and already choosing silence. Marcus sat alone by the window, but the room did not leave him alone. The cafeteria had returned to its normal sounds on the surface, spoons tapping plastic bowls, chairs scraping tile, officers talking over one another, but underneath it all was a different noise, the quiet pressure of people pretending they had not heard what they had heard. Brent Callahan kept glancing over from his table, enjoying the attention he had created. He had spent 14 years in the Riverton Police Department, long enough to know where the cameras did not reach, which supervisors avoided conflict, and which officers would laugh at a cruel comment if it helped them stay close to power. To him, the cafeteria was not just a place to eat. It was a small kingdom, and he had been allowed to rule it with jokes sharp enough to leave marks without ever sounding serious on paper. Marcus unwrapped his sandwich slowly. He did not look down because he was afraid. He looked down because he was listening. He heard one officer whisper, "Callahan is in rare form today." He heard another say, "Better him than me." He heard someone near the vending machines give a short laugh and then stop when no one joined. That was the part Marcus noticed most. Not Brent's arrogance. He had seen arrogance before. Not even the insult. He had carried worse words through cleaner hallways. What he noticed was the training of silence, the way decent people folded themselves smaller when decency required them to stand taller. Across the room, Daniel Price stirred a cup of coffee he had no intention of drinking. He was 29, only 4 years into the job, still young enough to believe the badge meant service, but tired enough to know that speaking up could make every shift harder. He had heard Brent's comment clearly. Everyone had. Daniel looked at Marcus, then looked away, shame moving across his face so quickly most people would have missed it. Marcus did not miss it. Sergeant Helen Brooks stood near the microwave with one hand wrapped around a paper cup. At 51, She had seen the department through budget cuts, leadership changes, lawsuits, funerals, retirements, and promises of reform that faded as soon as the news vans left town. She knew Brent was a problem. She knew the room had a problem. But she had learned to survive by telling herself that choosing her battles was wisdom, even when it felt like surrender. Brent pushed back his chair and stood. The sound was small, but it pulled attention again. He walked toward Marcus with the lazy confidence of a man who expected the room to make space for him. "So, rookie," he said, stopping beside the table, "what academy did they rush you through? Or did City Hall just hand you a uniform and a welcome packet?" Marcus lifted his eyes. "I have been through enough training to know when professionalism is missing." The cafeteria went still. Brent blinked once, then smiled like he had been challenged in front of his own crowd. "Professionalism," he repeated, dragging the word out. "That is cute. You learned that in orientation." Marcus placed his sandwich back on the wrapper, untouched. His voice remained even. "No, I learned it from watching what happens when people with authority forget that every person in front of them is still a person." The words did not land loudly. They landed deeply. For a moment, nobody moved. Outside the window, a patrol car rolled slowly through the parking lot, its tires cutting through shallow puddles from the morning rain. Inside, Brent leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough to make it feel personal while keeping it public. "Around here, respect is earned." Marcus nodded once. "Then it should start with how you treat someone before you know what they can do for you." Daniel Price stopped stirring his coffee. Sergeant Brooks looked down into her cup, and Brent Callahan, still unaware of who sat before him, mistook the calm in Marcus Ellison's voice for permission to keep going. Brent stood beside Marcus Ellison's table as if he had mistaken proximity for authority. His hand rested on the back of the empty chair across from Marcus, fingers tapping the metal frame in a slow rhythm that seemed designed to draw every eye in the cafeteria. No one asked him to stop. No one asked Marcus if he wanted the chair left empty. That was how the room worked. A man like Brent filled space until others surrendered it, and the people around him had learned to call that confidence instead of control. Marcus looked at the chair, then back at Brent. "Are you planning to sit?" he asked. "Or are you just making sure everyone knows you are standing there?" A small breath moved through the room. Not quite a laugh, not quite a gasp. Brent's smile tightened. "You have got a mouth on you for someone on his first day." Marcus folded his hands on the table. "You keep calling this my first day. Is it not?" Brent asked. Marcus let the question hang. He could have ended it right there. One sentence, one name, one title. He could have watched Brent's face change in front of everyone. But that would have only taught them to fear rank. It would not have taught them to respect people. So Marcus stayed quiet. He had come to Riverton to understand the culture beneath the policy manuals, beneath the framed mission statement in the lobby, beneath the words honor, service, and integrity printed on every training folder. And now the truth was sitting in front of him, not hidden in a complaint file, not softened by legal language, but alive in the casual cruelty of a lunchroom joke. Near the soda machine, Daniel Price felt heat rise behind his collar. He remembered the first week he joined the department, when Brent had told him that surviving Riverton meant knowing when to laugh and when to disappear. Daniel had laughed then too. Not because anything was funny, but because he was 25, new, uncertain, and desperate not to become the next target. For years later, he was still laughing at things that made him feel smaller afterward. He looked towards Sergeant Helen Brooks, hoping she would step in, but she was staring at the floor as though the tile might offer an answer. Helen could feel Daniel looking at her. She knew what he wanted. Leadership. A word. A line drawn clearly enough for the younger officers to see. But Helen's throat tightened around all the sentences she had swallowed over the years. She had reported Brent once, quietly, after he mocked a civilian during a neighborhood meeting. The complaint went nowhere. The next month, her schedule changed, her evaluations became colder, and people stopped inviting her to certain conversations. Since then, she had told herself she was doing more good by staying in the department than by risking her place inside it. But watching Marcus sit alone under the pale cafeteria light, she wondered when survival had started looking so much like permission. Brent leaned closer to Marcus, his voice casual but edged with something meaner. "Let me give you some advice. Around here, you keep your head down until somebody decides you have earned the right to speak." Marcus looked up at him, and for the first time, there was something sharper in his eyes, Not anger, not pride, but disappointment so steady it made Brent shift his weight. "That is dangerous advice for a police officer," Marcus said. "Keeping your head down is how bad things become normal." The words moved across the cafeteria like a cold draft. Daniel stopped pretending to drink his coffee. Helen's hand tightened around her cup. A few officers looked toward the door, as if hoping a call would come in and rescue them from the mirror Marcus had just placed in front of the room. Brent gave a short laugh, but it sounded weaker now. "You talk like you are here to teach a class." Marcus picked up his coffee, took one slow sip, and set it down. Maybe someone should. 72 hours before Marcus. Ellison sat alone in the Riverton Police Department cafeteria. He had been sitting across from Mayor Patricia Reed in a quiet office on the third floor of City Hall, watching rain crawl down the tall windows in thin silver lines. The office was warm, but the conversation was not. On the polished oak desk between them sat a stack of folders nearly 6 inches high, each one marked with dates, names, interviews, unanswered letters, and complaints that had been filed by citizens who no longer believed anyone in the department was listening. Some were from drivers who said they had been stopped without explanation. Some were from parents who said their sons were spoken to like suspects before anyone asked their names. Some were from business owners, teachers, veterans, nurses, people who paid taxes, coached Little League, sang in church choirs, and still walked away from encounters with the police feeling smaller than they had felt before. Mayor Reed touched the top folder with 2 fingers, not opening it because she already knew what was inside. "This city does not just need a new chief," she said. "It needs a new conscience." Marcus did not answer right away. He looked past the folders to a framed photograph on her wall, a picture of Riverton's Main Street during a summer parade. Children waved small flags from the curb. Officers smiled beside patrol cars. The image looked simple, almost innocent, but Marcus knew photographs could not show what people whispered after the parade ended, or what happened on roads with no witnesses, or what kind of jokes were allowed behind doors marked employees only. "Policies can be rewritten," he said finally. "Training can be scheduled. Press conferences can be held. But culture is what people do when they think no one important is watching." Mayor Reed leaned back slowly. She had studied Marcus before offering him the job. In Atlanta, he had helped rebuild trust after a misconduct scandal that nearly broke the department. He had opened community review sessions, changed supervisor accountability standards, and required officers to document not only what they did, but why they did it. He was respected, but not because he was loud. He was respected because people eventually understood that he remembered everything, listened longer than expected, and never confused peace with silence. "So what do you need from me?" she asked. Marcus looked at the folders again. "I need to see them before they perform for me." That sentence changed the plan. Instead of arriving at 1 o'clock with cameras, handshakes, and a prepared introduction, Marcus asked to enter the building earlier as a visitor, with no formal escort, no uniform, no announcement, and no visible title. He wanted the ordinary version of the department, the one citizens met when nobody was trying to impress City Hall. Mayor Reed studied him for a long moment. "Some people may not like what you find." Marcus nodded. Then they should have been more careful about who they became. Now, back in the cafeteria, that conversation returned to him with painful clarity. Brent Callahan was still standing near his table, still mistaking patience for weakness, still performing for a room that had rewarded him for years with nervous laughter and surrendered silence. Marcus glanced at the wall near the doorway, where a department poster showed the words integrity, service, respect in bold blue letters. Underneath, in smaller print, it read, "Character is revealed when accountability is absent." Marcus almost smiled at the irony. Brent followed his eyes and chuckled. "You reading the wall now, rookie? That poster is for visitors." Marcus turned back to him. That might be the problem. The room went quiet again, deeper this time. Because even those who did not know Marcus could feel that his words were no longer just answers. They were evidence. Brent Callahan heard Marcus Ellison's answer and gave the kind of laugh people use when they need a room to believe they are still in control. It was short, dry, and empty, but a few officers offered him the support of half smiles because habit can be stronger than courage. He reached toward the empty chair across from Marcus, pulled it back an inch, then stopped, as if deciding that sitting would make the moment too equal. Instead, he looked over his shoulder at the others and said, "Listen to this guy. He has been here 10 minutes, and already thinks he understands the department. Marcus did not respond immediately. He let the sentence settle where everyone could see it for what it was. Outside the cafeteria windows, the rain had thinned into a gray mist over the parking lot, softening the outlines of patrol cars lined up in neat rows. Inside, the light was flat and unforgiving. Every badge reflected it. Every face carried it differently. Daniel Price stood near the trash cans with his coffee cooling in his hand, watching Brent move deeper into something he could not take back. Sergeant Helen Brooks finally stepped away from the microwave, but only by a few inches, the way a person moves when conscience has awakened but fear is still holding its sleeve. Brent noticed the silence thickening and pushed harder. That was his pattern. When the room grew uncomfortable, he filled it with more noise. "Let me explain something, rookie," he said, placing both hands on the back of the chair now. "This job is not about pretty speeches. It is not about posters, feelings, or whatever they teach in those city workshops. Out there, people test you. Around here, we test you first." Marcus looked at him carefully. "And what exactly are you testing?" Brent smiled. "Whether you know your place." The words landed with a quiet weight that changed the temperature of the room. No one laughed this time. Not even the men who usually laughed first. The sound of the vending machine humming against the far wall suddenly seemed too loud. Marcus lowered his eyes to the table, not in surrender, but in recognition. There it was. Not hidden under humor anymore. Not dressed up as tradition. Not protected by the excuse that everyone was just joking. The truth had stepped out into the open and spoken for itself. Brent, mistaking the silence for victory, reached down to the table beside him and picked up a spare department cap someone had left near a tray. It was navy blue with the Riverton police emblem stitched in white across the front. He turned it in his hands as though it belonged to him, as though everything in the building belonged to men like him until someone proved otherwise. Then he placed it on the table in front of Marcus and tapped the brim once with 2 fingers. "Before you wear one of these," Brent said, "learn your place." Daniel's face changed. Helen's eyes closed for half a second. Somewhere in the back of the room, a chair creaked, but no one stood. Marcus looked at the cap, then at Brent's hand, then finally at Brent's face. He could feel the old ache rising, not because the insult was new, but because it was so familiar. He thought of every citizen who had sat across from officers like Brent and been spoken to as if dignity had to be earned through obedience. He thought of every young recruit who had entered a department hoping to serve and had been taught to survive instead. He thought of Mayor Reed's folders, 6 inches high, filled with people who had tried to tell the truth and received silence in return. Marcus placed his palm flat on the table beside the cap. His voice, when it came, was low and steady. "That is exactly what I came here to find out." Brent frowned, missing the meaning entirely. But Daniel did not. Something flickered in Daniel's memory, a photograph from an article he had read 2 weeks earlier about police reform in Atlanta, a composed black commander standing beside city officials, his name printed beneath the image. Marcus Ellison. Daniel looked from the man at the table to the clock above the cafeteria door. 12:42. The announcement was less than 20 minutes away. His stomach tightened as the truth began to unfold in silence. Daniel Price felt the truth hit him before anyone said it out loud. It started as a small pull in his memory, the kind of recognition that arrives quietly and then refuses to leave. Marcus Ellison. Atlanta. Reform hearings. Community Trust Initiative. The photograph had shown the same calm eyes, the same straight posture, the same expression of a man who did not need to raise his voice to make a room listen. Daniel looked at Brent, still standing over the table with the department cap between him and Marcus, and a cold wave of regret moved through him. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. That was the terrible thing about silence. The longer you practiced it, the harder it became to break. At 12:45, the cafeteria door opened, and a civilian assistant named Marjorie stepped in holding a clipboard against her chest. She was in her 60s, with silver hair pinned neatly back and reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. She looked around the room with the practical impatience of someone who had worked in government buildings long enough to know that adults in uniforms still needed reminders. "All sworn personnel to the main assembly room at 1 o'clock, she announced. "Mayor Reed is already on the way. No exceptions." A few officers groaned softly. Someone asked if it could wait until after lunch. Marjorie gave him a look that ended the question. 1 o'clock. she repeated, then turned and left. Brent rolled his eyes. Great. Another speech about values. He picked up the cap from Marcus's table and tossed it lightly back onto the chair where he had found it. Hope the new chief has thicker skin than City Hall. Marcus stood slowly, leaving his sandwich nearly untouched. The movement was simple, but the room shifted with it. He took his tray to the trash, placed the coffee cup carefully in the bin, and wiped one small crumb from his sleeve. Daniel watched every detail as if each one confirmed what he already knew. No nervousness, no confusion, no need to ask where the assembly room was. Marcus was not wandering through the department. He was measuring it. Sergeant Brooks stepped closer to Daniel as the officers began moving out of the cafeteria in loose groups. Her voice was low. You look like you saw a ghost. Daniel swallowed. I think I know who he is. Helen followed his eyes to Marcus, who was walking toward the hallway with the same quiet pace he had carried from the beginning. Who? Daniel hesitated, shame and fear wrestling in his throat. Not a rookie. Helen's face tightened. Before she could ask more, Brent passed them, still laughing with two other officers. Come on, he said. Let us go meet the boss. Maybe he will tell us how to be nicer to everybody. The words floated down the hallway and seemed to disappear into the beige walls. At 1 o'clock exactly, the main assembly room filled with the department's uniforms, pressed shirts, polished shoes, folded arms, and guarded faces. The room held maybe 80 people beneath a high ceiling and a row of flags near the front. The city seal rested on the wall behind a wooden podium. A microphone waited in the center like a witness. Brent stood near the middle with his arms crossed, relaxed, confident, amused by his own importance. Daniel stood 3 rows behind him, unable to stop looking toward the side entrance. Helen stood near the aisle, her jaw set, as though she had already decided that whatever happened next, she would not look away again. Then Mayor Patricia Reed entered. Conversations thinned. Chairs stopped creaking. She wore a dark gray suit and carried no folder, no stack of notes, only a single white card in one hand. She stepped to the podium and looked across the room for a long moment before she spoke. This department has been trusted with power, she said, her voice clear and steady. But power without humility becomes distance. Power without accountability becomes danger. And power without respect becomes something this city can no longer afford. Brent's smile faded just a little. Daniel stopped breathing for a second. Mayor Reed turned her eyes toward the side door. Today, Riverton begins again. Please welcome the new chief of police, Marcus Ellison. The side door opened. Marcus stepped into the room, and all the air seemed to leave it at once. For one suspended second, nobody moved. The name was still hanging in the air when Marcus Ellison walked past the first row of officers and stepped toward the podium with the same quiet control he had carried into the cafeteria. He did not look at Brent first. That was what made it worse. He looked at the whole room, at every uniform, every badge, every face that had been trained to stand straight when authority entered but had not been trained to stand up when dignity was being tested. Mayor Reed stepped aside and gave him the microphone. Marcus placed one hand on the edge of the podium, looked down for half a breath, then raised his eyes. Good afternoon, he said. His voice was not loud. It did not need to be. The room had become so silent that even the air conditioning sounded like a confession. My name is Marcus Ellison. As of today, I have the honor and responsibility of serving as your chief of police. The word chief seemed to strike different people in different ways. Daniel Price lowered his head, not out of fear, but from the weight of knowing he had watched the right thing happen and still chosen not to do it. Sergeant Helen Brooks stood perfectly still, her face pale with regret and recognition. Brent Callahan's arms slowly uncrossed. The confidence that had filled his shoulders in the cafeteria drained away, leaving him standing in the open with nowhere to hide. Marcus let the room sit with it. He understood the power of silence. Silence could protect cruelty, but it could also expose it when placed in the right hands. This morning, he continued, I came into this building without a formal escort, without rank on my collar, without a badge on display, and without an announcement. I did that for a reason. A few officers shifted their weight. Nobody spoke. I wanted to see this department before it knew it was being observed by its new chief. I wanted to hear how people spoke when they thought nobody important was listening. I wanted to know whether respect in this building was a principle or a performance. The words entered the room slowly, one by one, and found their targets without Marcus naming anyone. Brent stared at the floor. Daniel looked toward him, then away. Helen's eyes stayed on Marcus now, no longer hiding from the moment. What I learned in 10 minutes told me more than several months of reports could have told me, Marcus said. Some of you thought you were testing a rookie. You were wrong. I was testing the room. A breath moved through the officers like wind through dry leaves. That sentence did what anger could not have done. It made the room remember itself. Marcus turned slightly, his gaze passing over the rows, not cruelly, not triumphantly, but with the steady disappointment of a man who had expected better and still believed better was possible. A police department is not judged by how it treats the mayor, the cameras, or the people with titles. It is judged by how it treats the person standing alone in a cafeteria. It is judged by how it speaks to a nervous driver at midnight, a teenager on a sidewalk, a mother asking questions, a man whose name you have not learned yet, a citizen who has no power except the truth of being human. Brent swallowed, his face tight. Marcus finally looked in his direction, but only for a moment. He did not need to point. The whole room already knew. If your respect depends on rank, then it is not respect. It is calculation. If your professionalism disappears when you think someone cannot affect your career, then it was never professionalism. It was theater. The room was still. Not the easy stillness of obedience, but the harder stillness of people being asked to see themselves clearly. Marcus stepped back from the podium just enough for his next words to feel less like an order and more like a line drawn across the future. That ends today. Marcus Ellison did not raise his voice after drawing that line, and somehow that made the room feel smaller. He turned one page on the podium, though everyone could see there were no long, prepared remarks in front of him, only a few notes written in clean black ink. Accountability is not revenge, he said. Revenge is about making someone feel what you felt. Accountability is about making sure the harm stops with you. The officers listened without shifting now. Even those who had entered the assembly room expecting another forgettable introduction understood that this was not ceremony. It was a beginning. Marcus looked toward Mayor Reed, then back to the department. Effective immediately, the Office of Professional Standards will open a formal review of conduct inside this department, beginning with what happened in the cafeteria this morning. Brent Callahan's face tightened. He looked once toward the side exit, then back at Marcus, as if searching for a version of the morning that could be explained away as harmless. There was none. Not anymore. Officer Brent Callahan, Marcus said, his tone steady, not sharp. You will report to Deputy City Administrator Elaine Porter after this meeting. You will be placed on administrative duty pending review. You will have the right to respond through the proper process, and that process will be documented. A low current of shock moved through the room, but Marcus did not let it become spectacle. He did not insult Brent. He did not invite laughter. He did not turn humiliation into entertainment. That restraint carried more weight than anger ever could. Brent opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time that day, he seemed to understand that rank was not the same as protection, and that a badge could not hide character when character had already spoken aloud. Marcus continued, "But this is not about one officer only. A culture is not built by one voice. It is built by what other voices allow." Daniel Price felt those words land in his chest. Sergeant Brooks looked down for a moment, then forced herself to look back up. Every person who witnessed the cafeteria incident will submit a written statement before the end of shift, Marcus said. Not to create fear, to create honesty. You will write what you heard, what you did, and what you chose not to do. The room became almost painfully still. Over the next 30 days, every unanswered civilian complaint from the past 5 years will be reviewed by an independent panel that includes community representatives, legal counsel, and command staff. Every supervisor will be evaluated on whether they corrected misconduct or protected comfort. Every officer in this department will complete training on bias, duty to intervene, ethical communication, and respect under pressure. Someone in the second row swallowed hard. Another officer nodded faintly, as if hearing the words he had been waiting years for someone in charge to say. Marcus placed both hands on the podium. Some of you may think this is soft. It is not. It takes more discipline to control your pride than to control a scene. It takes more courage to correct a colleague than to follow a crowd. And it takes more strength to treat a person with dignity when no one is watching than to salute a title when everyone is. Mayor Reed stood quietly beside him, her expression unreadable, but her eyes held something close to relief. Marcus looked across the room. One final time. This department will still enforce the law, but from this day forward, it will also answer to the values it claims to defend. Then he stepped away from the microphone. There was no applause at first, only silence. Not the old silence that protected cruelty, but a new one, heavier and cleaner, the silence of people realizing that the room they had known was gone. Brent stood frozen among the uniforms, no longer the loudest man in the building. Daniel Price stared at his own hands and understood that an apology would not be enough. Sergeant Brooks straightened her shoulders, feeling the old fear still there, but feeling something else beside it now. Responsibility. And as Marcus left the podium, the department cap Brent had placed in front of him earlier seemed to appear in everyone's memory at once. No longer a symbol of who belonged above whom, but a reminder of what the badge had always demanded and what too many had forgotten. By 5:30 that evening, the rain had stopped, leaving the parking lot silver under the low Ohio sky. Most of the day's shift had gone home, but the Riverton Police Department did not feel empty. It felt altered, as if the walls themselves were listening differently. In the hallway outside the chief's office, Daniel Price stood with a folded written statement in his hand, reading the first line over and over until the words blurred. I heard Officer Callahan make a disrespectful comment, and I did not intervene. It was honest. It was also not enough. He knocked once, soft enough that he almost hoped Marcus would not hear it. Come in, Marcus said. Daniel stepped inside. The office was still mostly bare. A cardboard box sat near the bookshelf. A framed photograph of Marcus with two young recruits rested against the wall, not yet hung. On the desk were the complaint folders from City Hall, now opened and arranged in careful stacks. Marcus looked up from one of them, his tie loosened, his expression tired but steady. Officer Price. Daniel held out the statement. Chief, I wrote what happened. Marcus accepted the paper but did not read it right away. And what did you leave out? The question was not cruel. That made it harder. Daniel stared at the floor, then forced himself to meet Marcus's eyes. That I knew it was wrong before you said anything. That I wanted someone else to stop it so I would not have to. That I laughed earlier because I was scared not to. His voice tightened. That is not an excuse. I just wanted to say I am sorry. Marcus leaned back slowly. Outside the window, the flag in front of the building moved in the damp wind. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Marcus said, an apology is where change begins, not where it ends. Daniel nodded, the words settling deeper than comfort. What do I do now? You tell the truth when it costs you something, Marcus said. You correct disrespect before it becomes a habit. You remember that loyalty to the badge cannot mean silence toward the person standing beside you when they are wrong. Daniel looked down at his hands. Yes, Chief. Later, as the building quieted, Marcus walked back through the cafeteria alone. The tables had been wiped clean. The coffee pots were empty. The department cap Brent had used sat on a side counter, ordinary again, just fabric and stitching without a good person beneath it to give it meaning. Marcus picked it up and turned it over in his hands. A badge, a cap, a title, none of it could create honor by itself. It could only reveal whether honor was already there. The next morning, the first training memo went out. By the end of the week, complaint reviews had begun. By the end of the month, officers who once looked away started speaking up in small but real ways. Not perfectly, not all at once, but enough for the department to feel the first uncomfortable signs of becoming better. As for Brent Callahan, the review did what Marcus promised it would do. It documented the truth. It gave him a process. It gave the department a choice. And for the first time in years, the choice was not silence. Months later, a young recruit asked Marcus what he remembered most about his first day in Riverton. Marcus looked through the classroom window toward the same cafeteria where it had all started. He did not mention the insult first. He did not mention the shock on Brent's face. He mentioned the silence. That was the real test, he said. Not what one man said, but what everyone else allowed. Then he turned back to the room full of new officers, men and women wearing clean uniforms and nervous hope, and his voice softened without losing its strength. Never make a person prove their importance before you give them respect. By the time you learn their title, you may have already revealed your character. And somewhere in that department, the lesson remained, quiet but permanent. They had mistaken his calm for weakness. They had mistaken his humility for low rank. They had mistaken his skin for a story they already understood. But by the end of that day, Marcus Ellison had shown them what real leadership looks like, not power used to humiliate, but truth used to heal.